I remember the day my life turned upside down as if it happened yesterday. There was a knock on the door that morning, a simple sound that echoed in my chest like a war drum. My wife, Charlotte, refused to meet my eyes as she stood in front of me, arms folded protectively across her chest. We had been married for almost 7 years, and in all that time, I had never seen her look so distant. She mumbled something about betrayal, about how she could never trust me again, and I stood there, rooted to the floor, trying to understand. I had done nothing wrong. I had never cheated. The word infidelity felt grotesque on my tongue, but there she was, leveling the accusation with a fierceness that took my breath away. I kept asking why, but her response was always the same. I just know what you did. Charlotte insisted she had proof, but she never showed it to me. Her unwavering conviction felt like a punishment in itself, a sentence pronounced without a trial. I spent hours pleading with her, asking for any detail that could explain the sudden collapse of our marriage. She responded only with a cold finality. My heart pounded with confusion, love, and anger, an unruly tangle of emotions that made me question everything. The hopelessness was crushing. She demanded a divorce, a swift break from what she called the biggest mistake of my life. I shook my head, tears welling in my eyes, remembering the nights we spent laughing over cheap wine, planning dream vacations, talking about future children. All that was gone now, replaced by this stony resolve. In the end, I was the only one stunned by her relentless certainty. Everyone else seemed to follow her lead. When my parents caught wind of the situation, they did not invite me over for a calm discussion. Instead, my mother called, voice trembling with disbelief, or maybe anger, and demanded, "How could you do this to Charlotte?" I tried to defend myself, stammering that I was innocent, that this was all a misunderstanding, but she wouldn't hear it. She cut me off, repeating that I had shamed the family. My father refused to take my calls at first, and when I finally managed to reach him, he admitted he was disappointed. He believed Charlotte's story wholeheartedly. My parents had always adored her, praising her for her kindness and intelligence, seeing her as the perfect daughter-in-law. To them, her words carried more weight than mine. It felt surreal, standing at the center of a tragedy I had not authored, as my own flesh and blood condemned me without pause. In a matter of weeks, my life unraveled. I was served divorce papers at my office, a gesture that felt both humiliating and heartbreaking. Charlotte and I agreed on a settlement that left me with just enough to start over but far less than we had built together. The heartbreak, however, was the real cost. I lost my home, my partner, and my sense of belonging. My parents, convinced of my guilt, withdrew their emotional and financial support, ignoring my pleas for understanding. I was furious, not only at my wife for her accusations, but at my own mother and father for their callous willingness to shut me out. I had never imagined a betrayal like this could come from people who had raised me with the notion of loyalty and love. All at once, I was alone in a world that suddenly felt cold and unrelentingly cruel. The divorce proceedings were quick, just as Charlotte wanted. It was as though she couldn't wait to rid herself of me, as though every second she spent legally bound to me was torture. I held it together in the courtroom, my expression stoic, but inside I felt like a volcano ready to erupt. Yet there was something else I couldn't place, a tugging at my intuition that insisted there was more to the story. Why was she in such a rush? Why was she so certain of my guilt when I had done nothing to betray her? My suspicions nagged at me, but I had no proof. All I had was a hollow sense that my life was being hijacked by someone else's narrative. But the strangest part was seeing my wife's face in that courtroom, entirely devoid of remorse, as if she had rehearsed this heartbreak 100 times. 3 months later, I heard from an old friend that Charlotte had remarried. The news struck me like a physical blow. It wasn't just the speed of it, though that was shocking enough. It was the cruelty. She had accused me of doing something horrible without evidence, and then, seemingly without regret, walked into another marriage almost immediately. My mind spun with possibilities. Had she been planning this all along? Was there another man in her life before she ever brought up cheating? It gnawed at me that I had been forced to suffer the humiliation of a baseless accusation while she moved on so effortlessly. My days and nights blurred, filled with bitterness and grief. Each morning, I woke up wondering if this nightmare would end, and each night, I fell asleep tormented by the question of why she chose to destroy our marriage so ruthlessly. My parents, oddly enough, still maintained contact with Charlotte, acting as though she were the wounded party. It was infuriating. They sent her wedding gifts, posted congratulatory messages on social media, and lavished her with the same affectionate energy they once directed toward me. I tried reaching out to my father, asking him how he could possibly condone her actions when there was no proof of my infidelity. He told me he didn't need proof. Charlotte was like a daughter to him, and he believed her. That statement cut me deeper than anything else. He believed her more than his own son. The rational part of me tried to understand, but the hurt remained. I found myself longing for any sign from my parents that they might question the narrative, that they might give me a chance to defend myself. But that sign never came. As time passed, I focused on putting my life back together, albeit slowly. I moved to a small apartment downtown. It was sparsely furnished, just a couch, a bed, and a desk for my computer, but it was mine. I found a new job in a smaller company where my colleagues only knew me as the quiet man in the corner who worked long hours. My old social circle evaporated, with many friends taking Charlotte's side or, at the very least, deciding to keep their distance. The loneliness was overwhelming. Each day, I convinced myself to just put one foot in front of the other. I clung to the hope that one day the truth would emerge, that people would see I was not the monster I'd been made out to be. At night, I thought about the laughter and warmth I once had, wondering where it had all gone. In the midst of my despair, a flicker of determination ignited within me. I couldn't simply move on without understanding why my world had collapsed. Perhaps I wanted closure. Perhaps I wanted something more potent. Though I wasn't proud of the thought, revenge crossed my mind more than once. The betrayal festered like an infection in my chest, and I began to crave the vindication of exposing the truth behind Charlotte's accusations. Late at night, I combed through old emails, phone records, and any other trace of our life together, searching for a clue. My drive for answers became an obsession. I spent my weekends alone in my apartment, the glow of my computer screen illuminating my face as I scoured social media, digging for any sliver of proof that might explain her sudden, drastic shift in loyalty. Eventually, I discovered something that made my blood run cold. A timeline of suspicious overlaps between Charlotte's schedule and a man named Lawrence. He was an attorney, not someone I knew personally, but I recognized his face from a photograph on her profile. I found messages, albeit cryptic, posted at odd hours, sprinkled with inside jokes that were incomprehensible to anyone but the two of them. Nothing was definitive proof of an affair, but it was enough to stoke my suspicions. The pieces started to fit together in my mind. Her accusation of my unfaithfulness could have been a deliberate smokescreen to hide her own betrayal. The very idea filled me with a poisonous mix of anger and vindication. Finally, I had the beginnings of an explanation, a reason for the senseless destruction of my marriage, and I could not let it go. Fueled by righteous fury, I set out to find more concrete evidence. I knew some of Charlotte's habits, including her knack for storing important personal documents in a password-protected folder on her old laptop. Fortunately, I still had a backup of that laptop's hard drive from when we shared a home office. After countless attempts to guess her password, I succeeded on a combination of our wedding date and her mother's maiden name. My heart pounded as the folder opened, revealing files named with innocuous labels. Among them were hidden emails exchanged with Lawrence, long, intimate missives discussing their shared future, their plans once she was finally free. The timestamps on these emails preceded her accusation by weeks, if not months. The betrayal stabbed me in the gut all over again, but I also felt a sick satisfaction. I copied every piece of correspondence, every snippet of evidence, and stored it on an external drive. My mind reeled with questions about how this had gone unnoticed for so long. I couldn't help thinking that Charlotte had deliberately set me up, twisting the story so she could escape our marriage without repercussions. The speed of her remarriage suddenly made sense, as did her fierce insistence on my guilt. I stared at the damning emails, reading again how she told Lawrence that our divorce would finalize soon, that her family and mine believed her side of the story. She even wrote how relieved she was that my parents had disowned me. I felt my hands tremble with indignation, but my resolve only hardened. I would not forgive. I would not forget. I wanted justice. Nobody was going to hand me that justice, though. My parents made it clear they considered me persona non grata, and the few friends I still had warned me not to dwell on the past. But I couldn't let it go. The betrayal had taken everything from me, turning my family against me and leaving me friendless. I wanted to restore my reputation and punish those who had trampled on my dignity. My first thought was to confront my parents with the evidence, though deep down, I wasn't sure they would believe me. They had chosen Charlotte over me once, so why would they change their minds now? Regardless, I knew I had to try, if only for the satisfaction of seeing the shock on their faces when they realized just how wrong they had been. I scheduled a meeting at my parents' house. My mother's voice on the phone was hesitant, but she agreed to see me. When I arrived, the atmosphere was frosty. My father sat in his old recliner, arms crossed, eyes filled with quiet disapproval. My mother stood behind him, wringing her hands and refusing to meet my gaze. I started by telling them how much their rejection had hurt me, how I had never betrayed Charlotte. My father opened his mouth to argue, but I held up a hand and produced a folder of printed emails. I watched their faces as they read the words, the explicit mentions of an affair, the mocking tone Charlotte used when discussing my supposed indiscretions. My father's expression shifted from anger to confusion to horror. My mother started to cry, tears rolling down her cheeks. For a moment, I felt a surge of triumph. I waited for an apology, some acknowledgement that they had thrown their own son under the bus. My father stood up, the paper trembling in his hand, and mumbled, I don't know what to say. My mother tried to speak, but her sobs choked out her words. This was the moment I had waited for, yet the satisfaction was hollow. Their remorse, while genuine, came too late. They had already abandoned me, so I told them the truth. I wasn't here to mend bridges. I was here to make them understand the full weight of what they had done. I watched their faces contort in despair, but the feeling in my chest was not compassion. It was cold resolution. I left my parents' house that day with a new sense of purpose. They had realized their mistake, but I had no intention of forgiving them. Their betrayal was as unforgivable as Charlotte's. The next step was confronting Charlotte and Lawrence directly, although I doubted they would show any remorse. The possibility of a legal suit crossed my mind, but I wasn't sure how to proceed. Instead, I focused on collecting more evidence, documenting every expense we'd shared, every date that overlapped with her affair, every piece of false testimony she had used against me in the divorce proceedings. I crafted a dossier so thorough that any sane person would be appalled. At night, I replayed our arguments, relishing the moment when I would drop my findings like a bomb on their fabricated paradise. Within weeks, I had assembled a collection of digital and paper trails that painted a damning portrait of Charlotte and Lawrence's deceit. I discovered text messages detailing how they manipulated my parents, encouraging them to ostracize me to make the divorce easier. There were receipts for hotel rooms, dinners, and even a romantic getaway they took while she was still married to me. Each piece of evidence was like a shard of glass cutting away at the last vestiges of affection I once held for Charlotte. I found myself staring at pictures of the two of them, arms wrapped around each other, beaming with joy. My stomach churned, but my determination hardened. If they wanted to brand me a liar and a cheater, I would show the world who the real liars were. The time for retribution had come. I contacted a lawyer, a tough, no-nonsense woman named Patricia. She had a reputation for being relentless in court, which was precisely what I needed. I handed over all the evidence, explaining the personal and emotional toll the false accusations had taken on me. Patricia scanned through the documents, her eyes widening at the sheer volume of proof. She suggested we file a defamation suit against Charlotte, including Lawrence if it became clear he had intentionally aided in her deceit. The idea of dragging them through the legal system didn't fill me with glee, but I saw no other path to set the record straight. Patricia warned me that such cases could be tough, especially when dealing with family drama, but she was optimistic. With the truth on my side, we at least had a fighting chance. Filing the lawsuit created a shockwave among the people who had once dismissed me. My parents called, urging me to reconsider. My mother, tearful and repentant, begged me not to destroy Charlotte's new life. I asked her where that concern had been when they destroyed mine. I hung up, my heart pounding, but I refused to relent. This wasn't about petty vengeance. It was about reclaiming my dignity. Charlotte and Lawrence responded through their own attorney, denying everything, even though the evidence stood like a mountain before them. Mediation was suggested, but I refused to sit in a room and be lied to once again. We proceeded with depositions, each side presenting their case under oath. For the first time, Charlotte had to answer for her cruelty. In the courtroom, Patricia presented each damning document. The hush that fell over the gallery was palpable as email after email revealed Charlotte's duplicity and Lawrence's complicity. My ex-wife sat there, her expression darkening with every page. There was no room for denial now. The evidence spoke louder than her hollow excuses. The judge looked appalled, chastising her for weaponizing baseless accusations to ruin my life. When the verdict finally came, it was resoundingly in my favor. Charlotte and Lawrence were ordered to pay substantial damages, and a public statement had to be made to clear my name. Though my parents groveled for forgiveness, I turned my back. I had no intention of forgetting what they'd done. As I walked out of the courtroom, I felt no warmth in my chest, just a new calm. There is no forgiveness for betrayal, only the ruthless and absolutely final satisfaction of justice served.